Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth season of Inside the Avatar Studio. Inside the Avatar Studio brings together innovative leaders from the virtual technology frontier to discuss perceptions, perspectives, and predictions of what being virtual means in today's society. As part of our new season, I would like to oh my goodness, I'm stumbling over words right out of the gate.
That's okay.
As part of the new season, I would like to introduce everybody to Zinnia. Zinnia is going to be our new host for this season.
Hi there. I'm Zinnia Zalber, otherwise known as Renee Emiko Brock. I'm impressed you can type while talking. I can't do that. Thank you guys for joining us.
Actually, I'm not really that good. I'm using Dragon for this, so I'm hoping that's actually going to work.
Oh, busted. Okay.
Yeah, I'm busted.
Thank you guys for joining us and being generous with the fact this is the first time out for me doing this.
So Zinnia is going to, Zinnia and I have decided that for this particular first episode of the season, that Zinnia wanted to interview me. So I had agreed to do this, and I'm hoping that we are going to be able to bring guests by every month from this point forward. So I think you will find that Inside the Avatar Studio is going to become a regular component of what we're doing here at Rockcliffe from now on.
Excellent. So does that mean you're in the hot seat now?
Apparently, I'm in the hot seat.
Excellent. Well, so before I start asking you some questions, I want to ask the audience really quick, how many of you have participated or have been in the audience before in the Avatar Studio? Excellent. I know for myself, I learned a lot about education and opportunities in Second Life through this show. So I'm really excited to have an opportunity to work with Rockcliffe and the whole team to put on Inside the Avatar Studio. So we had a topic that you suggested, Ben, and that is education in the age of social disruption. So the first thing I thought about when I read that was having the one Neo, Ted say, "Strange things are afoot at the Circle K." So can you explain to us what that means? Education in the age of social disruption.
Well, this is an extension of something that's been ongoing for some time. We can no longer claim that I guess sort of technology is really sort of interfering with day-to-day life. And by that, what I mean is that we've come through a period where we've had rapid hardware innovation. So if you look back at something like Moore's Law, where they initially computer chips were doubling every year, and then once every 18 months, and now, well, for a while there, it was once every 2 years. Now we're sort of getting to the point where we're not really sure whether or not Moore's Law is sustainable anymore, regardless of what number you put on it. But as part of that, hardware is only one part of the equation. The social adaptation to hardware, the applications that we build around it, both of these are now quickly accelerating themselves. As people are becoming more used to what technology can do, and they're becoming more comfortable with the idea, we're developing all kinds of new apps, new applications, new ways of doing things. And that type of innovation is going to accelerate as we go forward, regardless of what happens with the hardware. So one of the challenges that we have as part of this is this idea of, again, of runaway innovation. And how do we adapt to those particular influences as things change around us? One of the largest problems that we have is that the ways and means educational curriculum is developed is such that it takes a fairly long time to get anything in place. So especially in formal education, right? There are curriculum review committees. Quite often, the educators themselves feel that they need to be experts in the field that they're teaching. But one of the things that we're seeing inside these innovations that are occurring is that nobody is really an expert in any of them. We're all sort of learning on the job. And so I think as part of that, as part of the disruption that's ongoing, that education itself is going to be subject to massive disruption as we move forward. The teacher is not necessarily going to be there in order to impart their knowledge of a subject area. The teacher of the future may be there to provide guidance on how to learn, as opposed to what to learn. That changes the dynamic of what educational instructors need to do and how they need to approach their students and their curriculums. So as an example, when video first came out, YouTube, and a lot of teens and 20-somethings started to take to it, like a duck to water type of thing. You had a lot of people in the education field that just simply did not understand how to develop a video, how to post it online, how to market it, how to share it. They weren't experts in any way, shape, or form in this particular field. But yet the impact of video on education is, I think at this point, undeniable. The ability to share workshops, the ability to transfer knowledge, both tacit and explicit. For example, just simply watching somebody in terms of how they go about doing something. You don't necessarily need to be explicit in how you describe what they're doing. If you're capable of watching the video and watching how somebody else approaches a task or a problem, we learn by watching. We recognize the patterns. And in so doing, we start to develop our own mental model of how we then, in turn, can do the same thing. So I think this idea of disruptive technology, disruptive innovation, is not something that's declining anytime soon. In fact, just because the hardware side of things, even if we consider the fact that maybe Moore's law at this point is dead, innovation itself is not going to stop moving forward. And all the other areas of society in which innovation has been stalled, for lack of a better term, I think we're going to start to find that these particular types of things are going to start to gain momentum as we move forward. So I'm hoping that answers the question a little bit for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So some of the things that we talk about, in innovation, and like you're discussing, that educators become guides. They become the Jedi Masters, right? That we're also trying to impart the idea of communication and creativity, which also combines with digital citizenship. So to be excellent to each other, right? I'm sorry, I'm using a little too much Bill and Ted Excellent Adventure. It's in my head right now. But it, is true. That idea of what, we do as educators and people who want to do innovative things, that we have to lead by example, right? And so digital citizenship becomes an important component, as well as helping people utilize these tools to connect and to be excellent. Can you talk a little bit about digital citizenship, please?
Yeah, well, I guess part of the thing with digital citizenship is, sorry, I got a couple of different ideas going around in my head here. If you look at it from ISTE's standpoint, right, and ISTE has a fair number of standards, and they have different models that they encourage people to use in order to have an understanding of what digital literacy, what digital citizenship is all about. So part of that involves the actual tools. Part of that involves things like e-safety. Part of it involves being good communicators. And there's a vast number of other things that they have as part of that. I think one of the things that is missing in all of this is the idea of trust, the idea that digital literacy, digital citizenship is a social activity. Not insofar as, because obviously ISTE has, and others have social components to what it is that they're providing. But the idea that resiliency to rapid innovation, disruptive innovation, is not necessarily an individual activity. It is something that is derived from our social circumstance, how we interplay, how we play nicely with others, and how we manage to exchange ideas back and forth. And that piece of it, that trust that you have in others to be able to share information without the expectation of having your ideas being taken advantage of, or you being, lack of a better term, cut out of the loop. There needs to be this element of trust in order to overcome a lot of what it is that happens with disruptive innovation. Beyond that, that really the other piece to this is overcoming this idea of cognitive dissonance. Sorry. And the idea that quite often, and this has been shown in other studies, right? It's harder for people of an older generation to adapt to new ideas. I think Marley's in the audience here. I mean, she'll has a lot of really good information with regards to neuroplasticity and the way in which we adapt to new ideas and new concepts. This is also a huge portion of the idea of digital literacy is how do we enable these particular types of sorry, Marley's just saying it depends on the old person. Watch out for ageism. Absolutely.
Yeah, you don't mess with Marley about that. You know that.
No. But I mean, the folks from Whole Brain Health right next door to us here, I mean, that's a lot of what they talk about is on this exact subject. And it's been shown in multiple studies that people whose minds are active tend to live longer than people whose mind are not active. And so when we're talking about digital literacy and digital citizenship, I think these particular types of things need to play into it as well. It's not so much about whether or not you can use the tools. It's about whether or not you can wrap your head around the problems. So the paradigms involved in using something that innovative, something that's unique, being able to adapt to the changing circumstances around us. And this part is not necessarily front and center on a lot of the programs that you see that talk about, we'll teach you about digital literacy, we'll teach you about digital citizenship. It's very easy to get caught up in the I don't want to call it eye candy, but it's the surface layer stuff, right? Because quite often the surface layer of these particular subjects are very easy to touch, to feel, to grasp, to work with. But yet the whole idea of digital literacy is so much deeper than that. And it really needs to go down to the level of saying, how do we learn? So because the essence of digital literacy as a skill set is really nothing more than a special circumstance of how it is that we learn in general. How do we incorporate lifelong learning into what we do every day?
So we talked a little bit about play, and like you mentioned, lifelong learning allows people to continue and their brains just expand and keep moving and having fun. And so when we talk about play and trust, do you feel that environments like what we experience here in Second Life, that we develop those kind of relationships, that we do play, that we do trust those who we're working with, and hey, what's wrong with being eye candy? Come on. That way, this environment becomes a space that people feel comfortable and free to learn more, to try things they've never tried before, and to pass it on to the next person. Why is this environment so conducive to those opportunities?
Well, the environment itself, I guess there's a two-part answer to that. So certainly one is the technology. But I don't want to really spend a lot of time on the technology part. What I do want to say about it is that the technology, especially in something like Second Life, OpenSim, sine wave, Unity, take your pick, right? Doesn't matter, right? Minecraft, right? The technology is simply a catalyst. It's an enabler. But what really I feel is more important is this idea of having a safe place that allows you to fail. And I don't mean fail in the bad way. I mean from the standpoint that a lot of how we learn is based upon our ability to try something. Yeah, we learn from failure, exactly, right? We try something, it doesn't work, we reflect on why it doesn't work, we establish new patterns as to what we can do to correct, and then we try again. And when you have an environment where the environment does not allow you to fail, that is detrimental to learning. And to a large extent, this sort of ties back a little bit to what we were talking about a couple of minutes ago. The role of teachers, I think, actually help facilitate that a fair bit. So as an example, when you teach something to a student, it doesn't matter whether it's child or adult. When you teach something to a student, and then you provide a summative assessment, true or false, yes or no, you give them some form of summative assessment on their learning capability. You are not providing an opportunity for them to fail. And so you get environments like this where the primary form of feedback is formative, where people get feedback in real time. Right? I build something, somebody hates it, they tell me right away that they hate it. I can then reassess, I can rebuild, I can replace. I can throw it out and do something different. But it's the culture that we have here. It's the people that we have. It's the social relationships that we have that really drive that environment that we consider to be play. You know, when you watch children playing in the sandbox, they don't care whether what they're doing is right or wrong. It's an opportunity to try, to do, and to not worry about the fact that it might not work. So when we talk about play from an adult setting, and I know this concept of play keeps coming up a fair bit, many adults get uncomfortable with the idea of play because they've forgotten how to play. But when you come into an environment like this, play is a default situation by virtue of the fact that the social network in here provides a trusting environment that allows for failure, for reevaluation, for reflection, and then for moving on with something unique and different. There are people, you know, especially adults in any environment, which are judgy about things, which is unfortunate, but it's just, okay, I'm going to have to be careful about the whole ageism thing here because I was about to say something that might get taken out of context.
Marley's looking at you. Okay, go. I got your
But
back. Go.
You got my back. Excellent. So, good. I got an opportunity to fail. I like it. So the idea being that, as we get older, as we get out of being a child to becoming an adult, there is an expectation that the number of times that you're allowed to fail becomes exponentially reduced the older that you get. Until you get past 75 or 80, in which case you don't care what anybody thinks, right? But
right.
Because certainly my mom's at that age right now. But I think it's about that culture, that environment, and play has to engender trust, and there needs to be a social dynamic, regardless of the technology. There needs to be a social dynamic that really supports people in their ability to try. I think that's really the core thing.
Excellent. So, I hear what you're saying about dealing with failure, and that people have a fear of failure. They also have that issue that everything has to be perfect as well. And it's right that if we have a culture that allows us to experiment, to be artists and scientists, right? And one of the things that I see as you started to discuss this in the beginning was that as an educator, we really are allowed to look to our students to define what they want to learn and how they want to learn it. And that takes a huge leap of faith for some instructors to believe in their students. And two of my students are in the audience right now, and I'm really grateful that they're here. And it demonstrates that they're willing to experiment. They're willing to go out there. And what I want to know is, how do we support this social dynamic that mistakes are okay, experimenting's okay, playing's okay, and really give people a chance to understand that they don't have anything to fear. They just have an opportunity to learn.
I think the answer to that question depends upon the age group of the people that you're working with. So, as an example, if you're dealing with K through 12, and especially that age range between, say, maybe 10 and 15 years of age, where adults know nothing and children in those early teen years feel that they know everything, and until they get older and they realize they don't. Part of the challenge to this, and I don't have a good answer for you on this, but part of the challenge is that the teacher has to feel comfortable giving up some of their power position. Because, especially in K through 12, in order to control the classroom, I don't mean that in the Darwinian sense of it, but in order to control the classroom, you have to have the respect of the students inside that room. And unfortunately, in that age range, as soon as children start to sense that maybe you don't know everything, they pounce, right? So this is going to be a bit of a challenge, because to enable play, the teacher also has to be in a position just to realize that they don't know everything, that they are not the sage on the stage, so to speak. And they have to more fulfill that role of being the guide on the side. And I really think there needs to be more of a swing back to that particular side of things. Now, that's far easier to do when you're dealing with adult learners, because adult learners have, within reason, they have an understanding that as the instructor, this is more of a peer relationship than it is a, oh, I don't believe I'm about to say this, command and control type of relationship. So, when trying to enable these particular types of things, I think is much easier with adult learners. It is about setting expectations. It is about getting everybody on the same side, and really, I guess, really sort of sticking to your guns in terms of how it is that you expect everybody to behave inside that setting. For the most part, as adults, we're capable of buying into those particular types of situations. Not always, right? There are people who want to be the class clown at any age. But when it comes to children, I mean, you do need to have a little bit of a firmer hand with regards to that. And I think I would be the first one to admit that regardless of the training that I've had with working with children's groups, that I'm in no way, shape, or form the expert on how to do that effectively with children. I've been a scout leader for 15 years, or was, I should say. I've worked with children's groups in other non-academic settings. And you can, for children, you can really capture their imagination. I think in part it's about setting a stage, telling a story. Children's minds are they're eager to absorb ideas, and the whole idea of being able to tell a ghost story around a campfire. I mean, that's a brilliant case in point where there's no stage, there's no mobile phone, there's no orchestra, there's no Hulk, there's no Iron Man, there's no distractions. It is simply you as the storyteller engaging their minds and then allowing them to fill in the blanks with the ideal situation that they are contributing to where the story is going. And again, this idea of allowing them a safe place to explore, to try to figure out where it is that the story needs to go. And it doesn't matter whether the story is simply there for entertainment or if it's there to teach a practical lesson on something. How to cook, how to put up a tent, how to oh my goodness, there's just so many different things that you can do. Because we used to do building with the scouts. We used to build things like teepees. We used to build forts out of logs, and we used to build catapults. We used to build bridges. There's all kinds of different things that we would do which require creative and critical thinking. But it's all based around, in order to get their engagement, it's all based around the story that you're trying to tell. And if you can tell a good story, you can get them engaged, and you can keep their engagement sometimes longer than you necessarily think you might be able to.
That's true. I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you because I remembered something that we talked about, how important a story is. And I just remembered that I was supposed to ask you about how you came to the name of Rockcliffe University.
Darn, I think I was hoping you'd forget that one.
No, it's a good one. It's a good one.
Yeah. So the name Rockcliffe University came about, and we were talking about this before, so I know you know part of the story. The name Rockcliffe University came about because as I was a kid and growing up through Beavers, Cubs, Scouts, Ventures, Rovers, we would go up from Toronto to Halliburton Scout Reserve. And this was a huge nature preserve, 5,000 acres, 3 lakes, no motors. Everywhere you went had to be based upon, here's your canoe, here's your paddle, there's the water, go to it. And it was great. So for every, since I was 12 through to, I think the last year I went, I was like 30, 32, something like that. So for a long period of time, I would go up to Halliburton Scout Reserve. And on the way, there was this little town called Minden, Ontario. And in there, there's this bar. Literally, it's a hole in the wall, right? It's really a dive. But it was called the Rockcliffe Tavern. And as a publicity thing, they would have these T-shirts sent up that said Rockcliffe University on them. And one of the things that I always thought was neat was, wouldn't it be neat if there actually was a Rockcliffe University? So when I came into Second Life and I finally realized what this environment was, and then I decided to set up an educational foundation in here, there was only one choice for me, and that was to simply call it Rockcliffe University. And it just simply was because it harkened back to that idea that, there should be a Rockcliffe University out there somewhere. So that's sort of where the name came from.
That is so awesome that your imagination came to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked a bit about contribution and creativity, that buy-in that people have. How important is contribution to this social disruption that you're discussing?
Oh, it's massively important. I have no studies to back up what I'm about to say, but I'm going to rely on the standard 80-20 rule. 80% of everything that we do in terms of learning new information, learning about disruptive technology, developing social relationships in here, it's all social. I would have to say that at least 80% of everything that we do here has to really be focused around this idea of having a social component.
Absolutely. So some of the things that you've also brought up is that you wanted to dig deeper, beyond the technology, maybe getting into the marrow of what we do here.
Mm-hmm.
How can you inspire people to dig that deep?
I think to a large extent, it's mostly, it's a couple of different things. Certainly one is by example. I mean, if you're not doing it, why should anybody else do it? And that's, you could say that about any given topic, right? if you really want somebody to be engaged with you, it's about telling the right story. And it's about showing them how it's done and giving them a safe place in which to do it. And you're going to have to forgive me because my mind just went off on a complete tangent, and now I'm going to have to ask you to repeat the question.
I like how you think I remembered what I asked you. I was asking essentially, how we can be successful at encouraging people to dig deeper into the marrow of what we're trying to accomplish here.
Right. So the other, and I'm so much younger. Yeah. Give me a break. So with regards to encouraging things, one is social. Two is this place where people can play and feel safe, that they can have trust, that they can play. I think the other piece of it, though, is that everybody does things for their own reasons. So just because I started Rockcliffe doesn't necessarily mean that everybody that I know wants to be a part of it. They have their own goals, their own ambitions. They have different things that they want to leave behind as their legacy. And as part of the discussion that I have with people when they say, I'd like to be a part of Rockcliffe, the very first question that I have for them is, what's important for you? What do you want to get out of this? I have so many different things that I could ask people for that I want, right? That I need for Rockcliffe to help build it up. But we're here to provide service. We're here as a service organization. And the first question that has to be on our lips every single time is, how do we support others in what they are trying to achieve? And if we can't do that effectively, then to a certain extent, the rest of it doesn't matter. We can have the best technology, we can have the best infrastructure, we can have the most wonderful people. But if you don't care, and it's probably a little bit of the wrong way of putting it, but if you don't care about the ambitions of others, then why would they care about your ambitions and where you want to go? And I think one of the things that we want to do here at Rockcliffe is we want to develop a culture. And we've been doing this, right? At various levels of success, but we've been doing this all the way along. We want to develop a culture whereby everybody gives a little and everybody gets a little. And we're not always going to agree. It's very rare that people do. But so long as we have a culture in place that encourages thinking about others and considering others first before we think of ourselves, I think that's one of the primary pieces that actually has to be in place.
So that idea of empathy deep in our bones, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
We want to care for others and that we want to support them in their interests. And quite often, we find partnerships and connections that way as well.
Yeah.
I mean, our audience is filled with so many community members that are our community partners, that are part of this Rockcliffe culture, as you say.
Yep. Yeah. And you try to do well by your friends to the best of your ability. But there's so many hours in the day, and the larger the group gets, the more difficult it is to try to cater to everybody's needs. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to continually raise the bar. Right? And to a large extent, I think it's also about, at the very least, letting people know that they are important to you, and that what they are doing matters.
So when you're saying all this, all I'm thinking is, I need just a little piece of dark chocolate. That's what I'm asking for. And and that,
there's a chocolate factory right by the conference that we're having in San Francisco, right?
Well, hello. What a segue. So you want to talk a little bit about the conference that we're going to have in San Francisco?
I would love to talk about the conference that we're going to be having in San Francisco.
We didn't even plan that segue. That was awesome. Go for it.
Well, you see, all you had to do was bring up chocolate. So this is the second year we're doing this, and we're trying to build a following to get people out to San Francisco. It will be a live conference. There will also be a virtual component to it, but we really need to get 40 to 50 people to actually show up to San Francisco in order to make this happen. One of the principal ideas that we have as part of this conference is that we've already shown through the Virtual World's Best Practice in Education conference that doing a conference virtually is cost effective, it's time effective, it's more than possible with a large group of people. And you can do very well with it. This year at VWBPE, we had 1,200 people show up. We have had, in the past, we've had upwards of 3,500 people show up to the conference. The lowest number of people we've ever had show up has been in the 1,000 range. And the average is probably more like, if you look at over 10 years, has been more like 1,800. So we've proved, we can show that this formula works. However, what is the incentive to go to a live conference? And that, to me, is the crux of the matter. If we can do all this stuff virtually, what is it about a live conference that really needs to drive people to say, I want to go to that? And it can't simply be about bums in a seat. And I apologize, hold on, let me change this, because it's not bombs in a seat, it's bums in a seat. I'm just changing this from...
Not bombs, bums.
Yeah, sorry, I'm doing this just because iSky will laugh at me as soon as she sees the word bombs.
Okay.
But it's a live conference shouldn't be about bums in your seat. You go to a live conference, and what's the first thing that happens? You get a whole pile of talking heads. You walk into a room. There's a seat, an uncomfortable seat there, and you're expected to plant your ass down in it for the next 8 hours. That shouldn't be what live conferences are about. Live conferences should be about doing things. They should be about hands-on. They should be about workshops. They should be about doing all those things that we can't do inside a virtual environment. We can get all kinds of, talking heads to come to a virtual conference and provide just as much information and just as fulfilling a networking experience as you can get by going to a live conference. What you can't get is that hands-on experiential learning, the tacit learning that comes by watching somebody actually do things in person. Because we can't simulate those things yet inside a virtual environment. And we can't do it easily, we can't do it cheaply. And for the time and effort it would take to do something like that, nobody has the time to make it happen. So we're doing a couple of things with this conference in San Francisco. The first thing is we're trying to drive the cost down into a range where people on a teacher's salary can afford to go. And that's a huge, huge.
That's really important.
That's a huge benefit.
People. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because there's lots of conference materials that I get. Now, mind you, I also get a lot of techie type conferences. But I've seen no less than 12 different technology and education conferences come across my email where they've said, here's a 2-day conference, or here's a 3-day conference, and by the way, the price tag is $1,800 or more for 2 or 3 days, plus your travel there, plus your meals and everything else, right? The average person on a teacher's salary has no capability of paying $1,800 to go to one of these education and technology conferences. And even when you look at something like ISTE's still charging close to $500, $600. Relatively speaking, it's a really good deal considering the size of the conference and what they put on. But even there, it's outside the price range of what most teachers have available to them, either through their institutions or their schools, or what they have available to them on a teacher's salary. The other problem that we have is that quite often the technology that makes it into these particular types of conferences are high dollar value items. So there's all kinds of stuff out there on drones and engineering and electronics. So long as you've got entry point is probably somewhere in the $300 to $500 range per student. Most, again, especially in the K through 12 area, you have a lot of teachers which are borrowing, and stealing in order just to get pencils and paper into their classrooms. Right? It basically saying, if you want to play with virtual technology, it's a class set of 30 is going to cost you $50,000. And by the way, that doesn't include content. That's a problem. That's a huge problem. So one of the things that we're trying to do with this conference is we're trying to bring this back to the point where the average teacher, it doesn't matter whether you're K through 12 or university, where the average teacher can afford to bring these technologies into the classroom. We want to try to keep the cost down on the conference so that they can afford to go. We want to provide experiential learning and workshops in areas where, taking it back to their classrooms, they can scale what it is that they've learned, either for free or at a very minimal cost by comparison to other alternatives that are out there. There's no other conference that's out there right at the moment that really has this particular focus. Everybody, including myself, wants to play with the latest and greatest new toys. I would love to have a complete set of Microsoft HoloLenses for everybody that attends the conference. But the entry point on that is $4,000 per person, not including the computer, not including the content. That's crazy. Right? And yet, things like Microsoft HoloLenses and such, 5-10 years from now, may be the standard by which people are doing design, building control systems, managing heavy equipment, even road construction, potentially. Right? There's all kinds of different things where technology like this, both augmented reality, virtual reality, digital spaces, maker spaces, how we train individuals, how we apprentice on different things. A lot of these things are going to be more pervasive as we go forward. Certainly the price will come down on some of them. But if you're going to train your students that you have in the classroom right now, the skills that they are going to need 3, 4, 5 years from now when they go into the workforce, how the heck can you do that if everything that you need to show them is so out of this world expensive? Right?
Absolutely.
There's this incongruency between where technology has gone and I guess to a certain extent, the expectation of what you should be able to charge for something that's new and innovative, as compared to the reality on the ground, that if you want the students in school today to be the best and brightest going into the workforce 5 years from now, right, then you have to do one of two things. You either have to start providing the technology at a price level that is amenable to the education system, or you have to give up the fact that you're going to get the best and brightest in 5 years from now. And unfortunately, that means social economic disadvantage for anybody that's inside a poorer community.
So it sounds like, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, that's okay. I was about to say if the technology is only available to those school boards or those individuals that have deep pockets, right, then you're limiting the pool of people that can become the best and brightest going into the workforce, right? You might be missing out on the next Stephen Hawking simply because that person might be, inside a, underperforming school board area, right? And all they're lacking is the right motivation in order to really understand these things.
Absolutely. And in education right now, we're trying to focus on equity so that all people have an opportunity So I suspect that what you're suggesting is this: at this conference, we're all going to sit around
No sitting.
Oh, I'm sorry. Standing, maybe doing a small jig around a tablet that has a lovely fire, and that you'll be telling us ghost stories and proving all of these ways that we can better our students and better the future.
I'm hoping that many of the workshops that we've got currently in the planning stages right at the moment, I'm hoping that Letty will forgive me because I'm going to intrude a little bit on her programming committee stuff here. But she's currently working on getting the program for the conference out for the end of this month. So we'll have something to announce on that within a couple of weeks. But it's, a lot of the things that we have in terms of what's here, the proposals that have been submitted, a lot of them are really going to tap into this idea of, how do we, first of all, being experiential, and then secondly of all, how do we bring technology down to the point where it's practical to provide in a teaching situation without having to rely on the wealth of your school board, the willingness of a teacher to give up part of their 401k, right, or major grant funding. Because right at the moment, those are the three major ways that this technology is making its way into the classroom.
Absolutely. I'm not going to mention how many lindens I just spent this morning for my students' work. So I'm looking at the time, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to share with us a prediction or to let the audience ask you a question. What do you feel comfortable about?
Either one is fine.
Okay. Does anyone have a question that they would like to give Kevin? Okay. So I suspect that they have lots of questions and they're curious. Oh, okay, Will, go for it. And reminder, we can't hear you guys, so just typing's great. Oh, you're getting extra questions. You see those?
Now I'm getting all kinds of questions, yes.
Okay, so who do you want to answer first? And can you read their question, please?
I can read their question. I noticed Will had his hand up first, so I'm waiting to see if he's going to post one here.
Will, okay, there he goes.
What do you foresee as the business model to sustain both the profit model and the academic side of technology in the future? That's a really good question. I think I might need a moment just to get my thoughts in order on that one.
I was going to say that's a total Will question there.
It is. I actually like it.
Go Will.
From my own personal perspective, it's not so much the business model as I think re-envisioning the way in which organizations actually need to work. And hopefully Rockcliffe might be able to serve as a bit of an example of this. So in the case of Rockcliffe, we're set up as a nonprofit organization, but we are not a 501c3. What that means is that we can get involved with for-profit activities so long as the profits from those activities are not distributed to our shareholders, of which currently the only shareholder is me. So one of the things I sort of see happening is this idea that a lot of these nonprofit organizations that are out there, 501c3s and others, need to have the shackles taken off to allow them to extend what it is that they're allowed to do to overlap with some of these for-profit activities that the IRS is currently limiting to non-501c3 organizations. There is something out there called a B Corp, which allows a C-type corporation in the US to reallocate some of their funds towards charitable and other philanthropist type activities. I think there needs to be more of that. And I think it needs to be recognized as a distinct type of business model where the sole purpose doesn't necessarily have to be running the organization to the point of no profit, or on the other hand, restricting what it is that you can do with profit when you do, in fact, have some. So I think that's, from a business model perspective, I think that's what sort of needs to happen. From a more practical standpoint, in terms of how things exist right now, I think it becomes more a matter of groups like Google, Amazon, Microsoft partnering more with smaller organizations, that they need to encourage diversity in niche organizations, niche businesses, rather than constantly trying to buy them out and to absorb them into their own operations. I mean, all of these companies started out as a niche organization themselves. And the more and more of these niche organizations that can't establish a foothold, the less diversity we're going to have in terms of innovation, disruptive innovation, and especially education, educational training, and how the workforce of tomorrow is really going to be able to be self-sufficient going forward.
Excellent. So I'm going to paste Buffy's question again. Buffy, thank you for asking this. And Buffy asks, how do you see Rockcliffe progressing in the next 5 years?
Okay, so in the next 5 years, I see a couple of different things. Certainly, well, as a consortium, like I said, we're here to provide service to other individuals and organizations. As in fact, service is our motto, right? Science, education, service, education, research, and virtual environments. So I don't see that particular piece changing. What I do see happening over the next 5 years is we have the Virtual World's Best Practice in Education Conference. We now have the Rockcliffe Conference going forward. We have new technologies that are coming online, and being able to make available to educators a lot of those technologies from a sandbox perspective, trying to bring the cost of those down so that they're accessible to people and that they have, again, a safe place to come to play, to experiment, to fail, to try again. There's also some things that we're doing with the Virtual Community Library Association and other library groups. And in these particular cases, we're not trying to, from a Rockcliffe perspective, we're not trying to compete with what they're doing, but what we want to do is be a catalyst for the different things that they specialize in. So the way I sort of envision it is that Rockcliffe would sort of become a hub where you would come sort of like the master catalog system or a master indexing system. We wouldn't want to compete with those people that do those activities well, but we want to be able to say, if you're looking for something in this space on how to work with virtual technologies, come talk to us first, because we know where everything's hidden. We know where the bodies are buried, so to speak. And by doing so, we can then direct people to the correct library system or association or educational group or nonprofit organization that specializes in those particular types of knowledge or training or support. So we really do, in terms of the future of Rockcliffe, like I said, our big thing is really trying to be of service to the community. And as part of that, I'm hoping that people will see the value in what we're doing and become members of Rockcliffe to help us support doing that.
Excellent. So Bevan is telling me that I'm allowed to give you one more question, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. She's the boss.
Bevan is the boss.
She is. And Buffy had another question, and this is really encouraging, guys, to know that you have questions, so that in the format in the future I can have more time for that. So this is what Buffy had asked. So she asked about at the conference in the VIP session with Ebby from Linden Labs, he wasn't too concerned about the numbers of educational folks in SL. No plans for extra promotion or special additional discounts. So how do you feel about that?
I have mixed feelings about that.
Okay, you can only have like 10 or 12 words.
10 or 12 words. Oh my goodness.
Okay, I'll give you 20. We'll be metric. Yeah.
Oh my God, where the heck to even start? I guess to a large extent, where I've got some concerns is the fact that the cost of the Second Life environment is still very high compared to other platforms. It's, even with the educational discount, it's still out of the price range of most people to have an environment like what we have here at Rockcliffe. And then you have teachers and instructors that are in here, and they're paying the retail rate for a lot of these places as well, because they don't necessarily want to tell their institution that they're necessarily in here. Not because that's a bad thing, it's just because of the way the procurements and the funding and everything else works for these types of things. So on the one hand, I definitely feel the price needs to come down. On the other, I don't think Linden Lab has had a price increase on the educators outside of the Finasco from 2009. Let's put that aside. Linden Lab has not increased the price on educators in like forever. So by default, the price of this stuff is, if you account for inflation, in effect, it's coming down year over year. I know in absolute terms that's not correct, because it's still, $1,700, $1,800 for a year for a region. But they haven't increased the cost at any point as we go along the line. And now that they're looking at investing money into the platform, hopefully the platform will remain competitive as it moves forward. So, like I said, I'm of mixed feelings. I'd really like to see that price point come down. But at the same time, so long as it's not going the other direction, that's not, and they're investing in the platform and they're going to put more functionality in the platform, I think that's a good thing.
Wonderful. So this brings us to that we're all in this together, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So Kevin, I want to thank you very much for letting me put you in the hot seat. I can't say it. And to get a chance to do this with you. And also, I would like to thank the whole team, Mal and Bevan, and the Rockcliffe team who's helped out, and all of you in the audience who's joined us. It means a lot to me. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Kevin.
Great, thank you.
Yay! How'd I do, Bevan? Did I do it good? Did I do okay? Okay. Yep. Thank you, guys, and we look forward to seeing you next month.